you ever planted pre-sprouted seeds before? I find it incredibly helpful, and there are 4 crops that I always plant with sprouts on them, and that is sweet corn, peas, green beans, and then of course potatoes. And pre-sprouting works really great for these 3 seed crops in particular, peas, beans, and corn, because they're ones that you usually direct sow. These are not crops that I would start like in my house in pots and transplant out. They like to be direct sowed, and so they really do benefit from being pre-sprouted. It's also just really neat to watch seeds come to life and to watch potatoes come to life before you put them in the ground. Let's start with potatoes. It's really important to make sure that when your potatoes go in the ground, they have sprouts on them, just like these. This will help make sure that they take off really quickly and not just rot in the ground, and it will also contribute to giving you a good yield come harvest time. And whether you call it pre-sprouting or green sprouting or even chitting your potatoes, the process is pretty simple and straightforward and really does make a big difference. When you first get your seed potatoes, whether you get them in the mail or from a local greenhouse, they should look something like this, which is very dormant. Nothing happening, nothing growing. They look like just a regular potato. Sometimes when you get them, they look like this, where they have just the first signs of life, little sprouts, and that's just fine too. We're going to treat them basically the same. And so the first step in pre-sprouting is to bring the potatoes out of dormancy, and how you do that is to let them come up to room temperature, about 70 degrees Fahrenheit or so, but keep them in the dark, and this will induce sprouting. The simplest way I found to do this is to just keep them in a cardboard box on my kitchen table. It's dark, it's warm, and they can still breathe, and I like to start this about 30 days before I intend to plant them out in the garden. And after about a week, they should look just like this with little sprouts forming. The next step is to basically keep them happy until it's time to put them in the ground. And that means keeping them in the light now instead of the dark, either natural light from a window or simple light from a light bulb somewhere in your house. And this is really important because we don't want the sprouts to grow long. We want the potatoes to be sprouted, but we want the sprouts to stay short. And so for this leg of their journey, I just put them in an open top cardboard box so they can see the light, and I can move them around as needed. At this point in their life, they also like to stay a little bit cooler. 50 degrees Fahrenheit would be ideal, but if you can't swing that, just keep them in the coolest room that you have. After another week or two, your potatoes should look like this, and these are looking great and ready to plant. The sprouts are the perfect length, and they're even starting to get a little green tinge on them, which is what we want to see. So these are ready to go in the ground, just as long as the ground is ready for them. And what I mean is that the soil is at least 50 degrees Fahrenheit or warmer, and most of the cold weather has passed. You can plant potatoes out 1 or 2 weeks before your last frost date. Okay, moving on to the seeds. There are a couple different reasons I like to pre-sprout my seeds. For beans, I don't know what it is, but I have something in my soil I think that likes to steal them, and it's less likely to do so if they're sprouted first. For peas, I just like to get a jump on the season and get them going as soon as possible. And for corn, it seems like I sometimes have spotty germination, and I like to see it sprouted first. I have much better results doing it this way. I'm going to show you 2 different methods for pre-sprouting seeds, and you can use either of those methods for any one of these 3 crops. It's mix and match. This is the bag method, and so you need a plastic bag. I like to use kind of a heavy-duty freezer bag. And then you'll also need some paper toweling, some water, and your seeds. And I'm using this method with peas, and I happen to be pre-sprouting a lot of pea seeds today. I'm also doing one thing here that I wouldn't necessarily recommend unless you're a little bit more experienced, and that is mixing varieties. In general, if you have multiple varieties of the same crop, you should keep them separate. That way, if one variety doesn't germinate, you will know exactly which one it is. Perhaps the trickiest thing about sprouting seeds is that you have to be ready to plant them as soon as they sprout, so plan accordingly. Peas will sprout in about 4 days at room temperature, so make sure that you have the time and that the forecast looks cooperative before you start this. The next step is to get them wet. I like to soak them for about 10 to 15 minutes. And now if you're working with a smaller amount of seeds, you can skip this step, but I find that when I have a lot of seeds, it just makes them a little bit easier to work with and a little bit easier to place in the bag. Next, we'll put the paper towel in the bag and try to keep it as flat as you can without wrinkles, and then pour in some water. For this gallon bag with a double layer of paper towels, I'm using about a half cup of water, give or take, and I like to just pour it in the middle and kind of let it wick itself around to the edges. And my goal here, the amount of water that I'm going for, is to have the paper towel fully saturated and to have like a little bit extra water than that. The last step is to add the seeds, and because I have a lot of seeds here, I know that they're going to fill this bag. I'm trying to, from the beginning, distribute them in all of the far corners of the bag because ultimately I want these to be in one single layer. I really like this bag method, especially for beginners, because number one, you can see all of the seeds really well, as opposed to the next method that I'm going to show you. It's also nice because the paper towel helps keep a perfect amount of moisture in the bag. Not too much, not too little, really the Goldilocks point, and it's a little bit more foolproof. Once the seeds are tucked in here, you can close the bag, and seeds need two things to germinate. They need moisture, which we've provided, and they also need warmth. So stash this somewhere warm, but also somewhere where you'll see it and not just forget about it. Because I'll be checking on these every single day, I like to keep them just on my kitchen counter where they're in my direct line of sight. Look at the transformation. After just one day, those wrinkly little peas plumped right up. One important thing I wanted to point out, do you see how most of the peas are plump, but some still have a few wrinkles? That's because I don't have enough water in here. There wasn't quite enough water to go around to plump up all of the peas, so I'm going to add a little bit more. I can also see that the paper towel looks dry just because the peas soaked up all of that moisture, so that's another indicator you can use. And this is what they look like on day 4. Some of them actually started sprouting yesterday on day 3, like this longer one right here. And then you can see there's also some smaller sprouts, like that one just started sprouting today. And these are ready to go. They're ready to get in the ground. I really don't want them longer than these longest couple that you see here, because as they get longer, they get a lot more difficult to plant. It's also a lot better for the seed too if they're a little bit smaller like this one, and you're less likely to break their little root as well. All right, the second seed sprouting method I'm going to show you is the jar method, which is also pretty simple and straightforward. And this one I'm going to show you with sweet corn and green beans. One thing I wanted to mention is I'm only doing a small amount of corn and beans today because it's not actually warm enough to plant these out. This is just for demonstration purposes, but I usually start a lot more than this. Okay, so when you're choosing a jar for this, make sure to pick one that is plenty big, at least 2 times as big as the amount of seeds that you're starting, just to make sure everything has enough room because they are going to swell up. I cover these with about twice as much water as I have seeds, and then I just put the cover on, and I'm going to let these sit overnight and let them soak up all that moisture. It's been about 24 hours. I dumped out the extra water from the jars because they didn't soak it all up, but here is what they look like. One word of caution about the jar method is I think the seeds can be a little bit more prone to kind of just rotting and molding if they have too much moisture in the jar. And to prevent that, every morning I come through and I rinse the seeds with fresh water, and then I drain out all of that water. The seeds are stored in these jars with the lids on, and the important part is that they have moisture, but they're not sitting in any puddles of water. And I'm going to do that every morning until they sprout. It is day 5 and the corn has sprouted, which is about on track. Of course, how quickly seeds sprout will depend a little bit on how warm or cold your house is. And I find that in my house, corn and beans sprout anywhere from like 4 to 6 days. And there are some long ones in here. There always are because some start sprouting sooner than others, but these are all ready to go into the ground. The beans, on the other hand, need another day. They're not quite there. I can see that they're about to sprout. I can kind of see under their skin that something is happening. Something looks a little bit different. I don't know if you can see that right there. And I expect that most of these beans will be sprouted by tomorrow. So how do you plant sprouted seeds? Well, the important thing to remember is that this is the root. And so especially on the ones that are longer, we want to make sure that we're putting them root side down. This is why I said the longer root they have, the harder they are to plant, because if they don't have a long root like this, if they just have like the teeniest, tiniest sprout coming out, you don't have to do this. You can kind of just throw them into the soil and the root will find its own way down. But when they're longer like this, I like to make sure and help them out and put their root down into the soil. Another method that I like to use, which is something I use only with peas because I sow peas really, really thickly, as you can see here, is to drop them all in a row. And then I come back through and I just kind of spin them around and push them down like this, which is a little bit faster and a little bit easier if you have a lot of seeds. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You can see here some of these roots are sticking a little bit off to the side. As long as they're mostly facing down, they will find their way. As far as the rest of the details, everything is the same as unsprouted seeds. We plant them at the same time, at the same depth, and with the same technique. For us, that means hoe in a row, dropping the seeds in, and then covering them up. And that's it. Happy growing. Let me know if you have any questions. And if you found this video helpful, I would love it if you could give it a thumbs up. And make sure to subscribe to my channel so that you are the first to know whenever a new video is posted.